Howdy, y'all. Welcome back. Thank you for being here. Today, we're going to be looking at the German capital city of Berlin. And when we look at these original photographs, I've tried to dive into the first photographs ever taken of Berlin. So we can see in the earliest maps of Berlin that this location was indeed a star fortification or a bastion fort. But beyond that, we also have these first images ever taken of Berlin, at least the earliest images I could find, and they are dated to the year 1840. Now, what really stands out to me in these photographs, what I found to be so fascinating is that all of these buildings, whether they be houses or smaller businesses now, they appear to be part of a larger structure. This appears to be one sort of factory like building that has been divided or broken down into smaller buildings that are now occupied by the public. But it appears that all of this is part of one larger uniform shape, one harmonious structure that made the outline of the city of Berlin. And to extrapolate on that further, we'll be looking at these first photographs, these first two images here from the year 1840. And as we get to the street level looking at Berlin, not only do we see these awkward sort of windows on the street level that are halfway buried, but the street itself appears to have been paved. It appears to be very clean. We don't see any residue of any humans or anybody in motion, which makes sense as the photograph was taken in 1840, but we also don't see any tracks from horses or any tracks from the carriages that should be driving up and down this most populated street in Germany. We don't see the residue of any sort of population. So I found that to be absolutely fascinating when we look in these first photographs. But again, diving into this collection, I also saw on many of the wider shots that a lot of the buildings in old world Berlin have these flagpoles on top, or what we are told are flagpoles, but we do not see flags on many, if any, of these flagpoles. And in some of the photographs, we can see dozens of these flagpoles, all of the same size on nearly every single old world building. None of them have flags, and each flagpole is probably 15 to 25 feet tall. So it makes you wonder exactly what these were being used for, why they were installed, and why at the time of these photographs throughout the 19th century, we do not see any flags on these poles. But that's again looking into the idea of Antiquitech. I would love to hear about any anomalies that stand out to you in these photographs. These images will be dated from roughly 1840, being the first images of Berlin, through the year 1900. Berlin is not only the capital of Germany, but it is also the largest city in Germany by both area and population, as well as being the most populous city in the entire European Union, with over 3.85 million residents inside the city limits proper. Berlin is also considered to be a state within Germany, making it the third smallest state in Germany by terms of area. The current narrative tells us that artifacts discovered in excavations at Berlin date back roughly 60,000 years, meaning two things. One, if this is true, Berlin has definitely seen some cataclysmic events. And two, we must take everything in the current narrative with a huge grain of salt. In roughly 9000 BC, the Maglo-Mosian culture was said to have begun to thrive in the lands that today make up Berlin, leaving behind intricate masks representing the local big game animals. Berlin was also occupied during the Nordic Bronze Age, or roughly 2000 BC, and here is where we begin to see the first ties to other societies that we have already discussed previously. Berlin being part of this Nordic Bronze Age culture that also inhabited the lands of Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, other parts of Germany, and Western Russia, was defined by the transition of this group from massive burial mounds and tumuli, or the tumulus culture, who constructed these mounds and built their settlements upon elevated structures. This culture transformed or amalgamated with the Urnfield culture, who utilized fire and immolation as their main form of spiritual independence. In the same context, we are told the Urnfield culture formed the origin of both the Celts and the Romans, seemingly indicating that at some point before the year 1000 BC, a split occurred between one singular unified culture, and this culture appears to have divided into these earlier groups which then conquered certain parts of Europe and beyond. Essentially, The pagan traditions, as described after the rise of Christianity, are essentially the rites and rituals of this Urnfield mound builder culture, which became the predominant form of culture that thrived in Europe before the rise of the Abrahamic. The Urnfield culture was said to have used the land of Berlin as their capital, and the society was well known in the ancient world for its use of wheat, barley, rye, beans, lentils, and domesticated fruit trees like apples, pears, and plum. And the Urnfield culture also brought a vast majority of the domesticated animals into Europe, or aided in the process of the domestication of cattle, pigs, sheep, goats, horses, and even dogs. The Berlin mound builders also used horse-drawn chariots on the hunt. We're told only around the year 500 BC did the original Urnfield mound builders further amalgamate with the Germanic peoples who had come upon their culture. The name Berlin is believed to be Slavic in origin, more directly related to the Western Slavic people, and Berlin most likely means the Great Swamp. Extrapolating on this further, Berlin has 12 boroughs, of which 5 are Slavic-derived names. However, the current narrative claims that the first attested Slavic tribes who arrived to Berlin did not arrive until the 7th century, settling Berlin following the exit of the Burgundians. Here is where we begin to arrive at the phantom aspect of the timeline as well. Essentially, this history of Berlin goes dormant until the 12th century, when Berlin becomes a principality of the Holy Roman Empire. The larger landscape becomes known as Brandenburg, and this was founded by Albert the Bear. Excavations in the 20th century revealed stone house foundations in Berlin dated to the late 1200s, and the first written record to mention the land of Berlin comes around that same time period. The official founding of the city of Berlin is accepted as 1237. Berlin was considered the most important city along the 2 major trade routes which shaped the Holy Roman Empire, and thus Berlin was said to have grown rapidly from the year 1237 onward. In the 15th century, through the end of World War I, Berlin was ruled by the Hohenzollern family. The Hohenzollerns rose from the original electors of Brandenburg into the kings of all of Prussia, and from the kings of Prussia into the emperors of the entire Holy Roman Empire. In 1443, Frederick Irontooth began construction of a great wall to surround the entire city of Berlin. This construction was met with great protest by the citizens of Berlin, and this protest became known as the Berlin Indignation. This eerily reminded me of the fall of the Berlin Wall that happened not so long ago. It appears this history is cyclical. We're told massive numbers of French people began to flock to Berlin, and around the year 1700, the estimated population was over 30% French. Berlin remained a massive powerhouse of art, society, and architecture throughout the French Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution transformed Berlin into the largest city in all of Germany, as well as the hub for all trade into German lands and the major connection into all German lands for all major European railways. Today, we're going to look through the first photographs of this great mecca of German culture, dated to before much of Berlin's landscape was devastated during the major world wars. This is Berlin in the 19th century.